Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us tmosso@the1916company.com for pricing. That is tmosso@the1916company.com. Today, we are discussing something that debuted as you see it at SIHH in 2017 in yellow gold. This is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Extra Thin, the Jumbo, 15202BA. This was the year AP recommitted to the Jumbo in yellow gold, and that followed 2016's recommitment to yellow gold across the Royal Oak line. So this is the closest living descendant of Gerald Genta's original 1972 Royal Oak 5402, and so even to the mechanical level, it is very true to history. Dimensionally, it's spot on. 39 millimeters in diameter in yellow gold. It's 8.1 millimeters thick. From lug tip to lug tip, if we're just talking about the case, it's 48.6 millimeters. If we include these little double plots, these intermediate links outboard, then the total distance across the wrist is 51.8. On my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, you get a good sense of the watch. It wears larger than its rated size, and all Royal Oaks and offshores do, particularly when they're on bracelets. So though it's a 39, I feel it wears more like a 40 or a 41, so just keep that in mind. If you want to compare it to a round watch, very thin, and it'll fit under a cuff, but think of it as a 40 or 41 millimeter round watch. Now, I could see this wearing on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference because I'm not really having any issues. And you can see I've got clearance. The lugs are not over the edge of my wrist on either side. Over the top always exaggerates the width of the watch, but you can even see there, pulling it tight, it's still not over the edge of my wrist. One of the things you pay for when you buy a Royal Oak is the hand finishing of the metal. Now, it's impressive enough on steel, but on gold, it's really something else. The bracelet alone takes 9 to 11 hours to finish, and that's before we get to the case and the bezel. And you can see that the clasp internally features both satination and media blast. The clasp is a double fold. You can see it's a sequential close. One side, the one without the logo, closes first, and then it is a twin trigger release. These clasps have gotten a lot more robust over the years, though this is the Jumbo. The clasp feels robust enough for an offshore, and it will not open unless you press both triggers simultaneously. Now, the original design of the Royal Oak was intended to read as a bracelet because Gerald Genta envisioned himself first and foremost a proud designer of jewelry, so he wanted to create a bracelet that happened to include a timepiece, and so that's what he did. So we had full integration of the lines of the case into the lugs into the bracelet, and then it tapers down toward the clasp. You can see the fine finishing little shoulder bevel continuing down the side of the links. The ends of these intermediate links being polished on their face is really difficult to see unless you roll it through the light, but the attention to detail is rich. You can see satination across the tops of the primary and intermediate links, and removable links on both sides of the bracelet fixed by screws. The bracelet fixed to the case using screws and bars, more secure than spring bars. I love to see that arrangement. We have a hexagonal push-down crown. Water resistance is 50 meters, but because this is a push-down crown, I recommend you not swim with it. Taking a quick look, you can see that hexagonal form is duplicated in the shape of the white gold bolts, and they are bolts that sit inside the bezel. They're bolts with nuts on the inside of the case. That's how these slots can be aligned all the way around. The case features facets that continue from bezel into mid-case into case back. There's a hairline expression of the bezel gasket. It's a very subtle styling cue. You can see that the bezel has a vertical satin top, a rounded and polished flank, and a tiny satinated vertical lip outboard. The inside of the bezel is mirror polished, which reflects light onto the dial in beautiful fashion. We have the Petite Tapisserie dial, which is the small hobnail. The Petite and the Grand Tapisserie, they are the hobnails that are pantograph cut. The Mega on the offshore, that is stamped. But this is created by a 19th century style mimicry engine that has a really huge template to work off of, and then it inscribes every detail of that giant template onto the tiny disc that becomes the dial. And so you can see not only do we have the hobnails, but there are textures over the hobnails and between them. Between 10 and 20,000 little dots on this dial. Yellow gold logo, hands, and indices so that they match the color of the watch, but also so they won't tarnish, oxidize, or discolor over time. Really not bad from a lume standpoint. You can read this watch in the dark. And then we have a vintage movement. It's not new old stock, but it is a vintage architecture. So let me see if I can demonstrate to you how the date mechanism works here. Let's see. I'm going to have to go all the way around. Okay, so this is a movement that was first introduced in 1967, designed by Jaeger-LeCoultre for AP, Vacheron, and Patek. It was only ever used by the Holy Trinity, and one of the tricks that JLC used to make the movement thinner was to omit any kind of quickset mechanism. So you have this mechanism where you actually back up between 10 p.m. and 12 a.m., seesawing back and forth to advance the date, so it is a semi-quickset date. Now flipping it all over, you can see the legendary AP caliber 2121. Let me get a little bit closer to my light source over here. As I mentioned, this was developed as the JLC 920 Bausch in 1967, and the base movement is just about 2.4 millimeters thick. With the date, it's 3.05, still very thin. In 1967, it was one of the thinnest movements in existence that had automatic winding, and so it was only ever used by Holy Trinity, never by JLC or its other clients. The movement here is exquisitely decorated, but also, it should be noted, built in-house by Audemars Piguet, as in the modern era, it constructs all parts of this movement. It is not an Bausch from JLC. You can see that the rotor features impressive sculpting, skeletonized with internal bevels, deep detailing levels that are frankly one of the primary attractions of this watch. You have satin, you have beveling, you have polishing on this, and media blasting on this rotor. And then on the movement, you could see why Audemars Piguet ditched this movement on its latest generation of jumbo. Bevels like this take time. The new movement, unfortunately, is cheaper and easier to mass produce. This is the one you want. Solarization on the ratchet wheel as well as the crown wheel core, all screw heads black polished and chamfered, beautiful stripes or Côte de Genève across the bridges, engine turning on the base plate. Now technical specs: unidirectional winding with 40 hours of power reserve, a quirky beat rate of 19,800 vibrations per hour, which was very current in the late 60s, but seems a little bit vintagey today. 36 jewel movement. You can see it's been upgraded with a free-sprung Gyromax style balance to better take and hold a precise adjustment, and also to better stand up against shock. And speaking of which, the means by which the rotor is sunken so close to the bridges without contacting them, we have this beryllium ring that runs all the way around the movement, and there are 4 ruby roller bearings that sit underneath that ring. So no matter how this watch is shocked, the rotor can't come in contact with the bridges, and then the ring underneath can't come in contact with the base plate. So it allows it to be automatic winding, but also very, very thin. And the finish here is peerless. It's the good stuff. It's the Audemars Piguet about which you dream. If you love this watch, reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916 Company for purchase and pricing details.